The drive back to Boise felt heavier than 9 years of absence. Every mile I traveled pressed memories into my chest like a seatbelt tightening around my ribs. I gripped the steering wheel, the tires crunching over familiar gravel, already stirring a long dormant tension in my stomach. I hadn't planned to come home for Easter, not after all the years of silence, but something deep inside insisted on it. Something that wanted to see my family one last time, not for approval, but for clarity. The ranch-style house loomed ahead, exactly as I remembered. The porch light flickered weakly, casting a tired glow over the chipped steps. The front door opened before I even had a chance to grab my bag, and there she was, my mother, Gloria Morrison. Arms crossed, sharp gaze fixed on me as if I were a visitor trespassing on sacred ground. There was no hug, no warmth, just a nod toward the dining room. "Dinner's ready," she said, her tone measured, her smile absent. Inside, the air was thick with nostalgia and irritation. The familiar blend of roasted ham and cheap floral spray smothered the room, and I felt a twinge of anger mixed with the ache of memory. My father, Steve, sat at his usual head-of-the-table spot, flipping through a car magazine without so much as glancing up. Landon, 5 years my junior, lounged across two chairs like the king of the world, phone in hand, grinning about some deal he had closed at the dealership. "Sold 3 trucks this week," he boasted, voice loud enough to bounce off the walls. My mom beamed at him, patting his shoulder as she passed the mashed potatoes. "That's my boy, making us proud every day." I took the empty seat near the window, the one no one cared to fight over anymore. It had always been my corner, the quiet side of the table, the place where I existed without fanfare. The conversation swirled around Landon's numbers, his new commission check, the shiny upgrades he was planning for his pickup. I watched, silent, as my mom glanced my way, a mixture of scrutiny and comparison in her eyes. And then it came. The question that had haunted my dreams for years. She paused midair, fork hovering over Landon's plate, and finally turned toward me. "And you? What have you done lately that earns you a spot at this table?" The room fell silent, the tick of the wall clock louder than any voice. Landon smirked, leaning back, his smugness filling the space between us. Dad finally looked up, but he said nothing, just lifted the magazine like a shield. My mom's eyes narrowed, lips tightening. "Well," she said, her voice sharper than a carving knife, "you haven't earned your place here." The laughter that followed wasn't polite or playful. It was sharp, invasive. Landon's snort turned into a loud chuckle. Dad's lips twitched before hiding the laugh behind a sip from his glass. Cousins at the kids' table giggled, pointing like they were watching a show, not a person. Heat crawled up my neck, my chest tightening, but I kept my voice steady. "Good thing my success doesn't need your approval." The scrape of my chair on the floor echoed like a gavel as I stood, pushing past the weight of judgment, past the echo of every dismissal I'd endured. "Don't you walk away from this family," my mother called, sharp and urgent. "I'm not walking away from family," I replied over my shoulder, keys in hand. "I'm walking toward the one I built." She followed me to the porch, her voice rising. "You're embarrassing us!" I didn't stop. The screen door slammed behind me. I slid into the driver's seat, the engine humming as I backed down the driveway, watching the house shrink, watching the porch light fade. Landon's smug grin was still there in the window. Dad stayed inside, eyes on the fading interior. I drove into the darkness, the long road out of Boise stretching ahead, feeling, for the first time in years, that I was moving in the right direction. The radio crackled, old country songs spilling into the car. Mom hated this station, always complaining about the twang in the voice, the sentimentality of the lyrics. I let it fill the car, windows down, cold Idaho air whipping through like it was clearing 9 years of dust from my lungs. Memories of laughter, plates stacked with ham, and conversations about touchdowns faded behind me, leaving only the quiet truth. I had survived. I had built something real, something my family didn't, and maybe never would, understand. Stopping at a gas station on the edge of town, I filled the tank and grabbed a coffee, the clerk nodding at me as if he recognized the look of someone leaving, not arriving. Easter was over. The night stretched ahead, full of possibility. And I realized that whatever came next, success, peace, even reconciliation, it would start on my terms. No validation required. Growing up, our Sunday dinners were non-negotiable. The oak table in our Boise home was polished to a dull shine, chairs lined up with military precision. The smell of slow-cooked meals and fresh-baked bread clung to the air. My younger brother, Landon, the baby of the family, always got the biggest portions, the extra chicken, the corner brownie, the praise that came with it. Every touchdown on the football field, every minor victory, became a reason for celebration in our house. His grin under the helmet was replayed in slow motion on the living room TV. My mother would pause each highlight, pointing out his perfect form, his hard work, his dedication. And I, sitting quietly at the far corner, felt invisible. School for me wasn't about sports. At 12, while Landon was practicing passes for the varsity team, I found an old laptop in my dad's garage. It was a relic from his office job, cracked, dusty, and barely functional, but it was mine now. Nights were spent learning coding from free online tutorials, fingers sticky from glue and dust flying over the keys. The library downtown became my sanctuary, lending me film cameras every weekend. I would hike the Boise foothills, capturing light as it hit abandoned barns, frost on fences, the subtle beauty no one seemed to notice. Mom noticed the camera first. She squinted at it one evening like it was a toy. "What's that for?" she asked, voice tinged with curiosity but lined with skepticism. I explained I was developing photos in the school darkroom, experimenting with exposures, learning techniques. She laughed, short and sharp, dismissive. "Photography won't put food on the table, Jordan. Focus on something real." That was the end of the conversation. Later that night, Landon scored another touchdown, and the house erupted in celebration. But I didn't stop. Each success felt small, each project a tiny victory. Neighbors began noticing my skill. Mrs. Henderson's email wouldn't load. Mr. Patel's printer jammed. They brought me problems and I fixed them, for $20 here, a handful of coins there, stashing the cash in a coffee can under my bed. By 14, I had saved enough for a second-hand digital camera. I had tangible proof that I could create, that I could provide, that my work mattered, even if the people whose approval I craved never said it aloud. At school, I learned to navigate invisible walls. Sports were the currency of attention. I didn't trade in it. I learned to speak in silence, letting my skills and quiet persistence mark my presence in ways my family would never notice. Teachers appreciated my aptitude for problem solving, my creativity, my diligence. But home was a different world. At home, praise was reserved for Landon, for achievements measured in touchdowns and trophies, for the external markers of success that aligned with Mom's ideals. There were moments when the weight of invisibility threatened to crush me. I remember sitting in my room, darkroom chemicals stinging my fingers, watching Landon's highlights replayed on TV. I would press my face against the camera lens, imagining a world where my own efforts mattered as much. I wrote code into the night, tinkered with photography, and quietly solved problems no one else wanted to tackle. It was exhausting and lonely, but it built a resilience that would follow me for years. By the time I turned 16, I had become somewhat of a neighborhood tech guru. Computers, cameras, even simple electrical problems, people brought them all to me. Each time I fixed something, I earned a little cash, but more importantly, I earned proof of my independence. Landon was still scoring touchdowns, still winning praise for every visible success, And Mom still celebrated him like he was the center of the universe. But I was quietly building my own universe, one I would one day inhabit far from Boise, far from the judgmental eyes of the people who were supposed to lift me up. It was in these quiet, unnoticed hours that I learned the most important lesson. Recognition is temporary, but skill, knowledge, and persistence are permanent. The world outside our little Boise bubble wouldn't measure me by touchdowns or sales numbers. It would measure me by results, by creativity, by resilience, the very things my family dismissed. And I vowed that one day I would show them that the child they overlooked had quietly built a life they couldn't even imagine. Leaving Boise wasn't easy. The town had been my entire world for years, its streets worn into my memory, its smells ingrained in my senses. But I knew that to grow, I had to step beyond the familiar gravel of my driveway, beyond the hollow praise that accompanied Landon's victories, beyond the judgmental eyes of parents who measured worth by trophies and sales. I packed my bags quietly one morning, careful not to attract attention. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't need anyone's permission. Pittsburgh was my first destination. The city's gray skyline and rushing streets were a shock after the quiet familiarity of Boise. But there was freedom in the unfamiliar, a strange kind of electricity in the anonymity of strangers. I rented a small studio apartment and spent my first weeks diving headfirst into coding projects and photography. Nights were long, caffeine-fueled affairs, fingers flying over keyboards, the hum of a printer or the click of a shutter my only companions. Here, success was measured differently. It wasn't about applause at a dinner table, it was about results, about creating, about proving to myself that I could thrive without validation. I took odd jobs at tech stores, fixing computers and helping customers navigate software. Each problem solved, each satisfied client, was a quiet victory. No one in Boise knew I was doing this. No one needed to. The cash I earned built my confidence and gave me a sense of control over my life. Slowly, I started investing in better equipment, digital cameras, editing software, even a secondhand laptop with more processing power. Every purchase felt like a step forward, a silent, middle finger to the family that had told me my passions were worthless. Denver came next. By the time I arrived, I was no longer just surviving, I was thriving. Freelance projects poured in, small businesses needing websites, friends wanting professional portraits, a local cafe wanting a photography mural. I was recognized for my skill, my creativity, my professionalism. No one in Denver cared that I hadn't scored a touchdown in high school or that I wasn't Landon. Here, I defined my own worth. Distance taught me lessons that 9 years of family dinners never could. Silence could be louder than any argument. Absence didn't mean running away, it meant choosing. Choosing to invest in myself, to grow in ways the people who judged me never would understand. Each day, I learned more about patience, about persistence, about the kind of discipline it takes to build something that lasts. And yet, even with every milestone, a part of me ached. Boise, the oak table, the smells of ham and brownies, Mom's laughter over Landon's successes, they were memories that clung stubbornly. But they didn't define me anymore. I had learned to carry those memories without letting them dictate my self-worth. Pittsburgh and Denver weren't just cities, they were classrooms of life. They taught me how to measure myself by tangible achievements rather than by comparisons to others. They taught me the value of quiet victories, the power of skill honed in solitude, and the liberation of walking a path I chose for myself. I learned to see setbacks not as failures, but as lessons, each one strengthening my resolve. By the time I returned home years later, I wasn't the quiet, overlooked boy in the corner anymore. I had built a life that demanded recognition, not from my family, but from the world, and most importantly, from myself. The weight of 9 years away, of countless silent victories, of late nights and long drives, had sculpted a version of me that my parents and brother could never ignore, even if they didn't understand it yet. Driving back to Boise that Easter, I felt a strange mixture of apprehension and calm. The town hadn't changed much, but I had. Every mile closer, every familiar landmark, reminded me of the boy I once was, and the man I had become. This time, I wasn't returning to seek approval or validation. I was returning to see once and for all if the family who had dismissed me for years could recognize the life I had built. A life defined by independence, by skill, and by the quiet power of perseverance. And if they couldn't, it didn't matter. I had chosen this path, and it was mine. Pulling into the gravel driveway of the Morrison house, my chest tightened, but not with fear. With each crunch of tires over familiar rocks, memories pressed against me like uninvited guests. The house hadn't changed much, the same ranch-style exterior, the porch light flickering weakly, the scent of spring brushing through the air. I grabbed my bag, stepping toward the front door, already bracing myself for the performance I'd been dreading for years. Before I could knock, the door swung open. Mom stood there, arms crossed, sharp-eyed as ever. There was no hug, no warmth, only the subtle suggestion that I was crossing a line I had no right to approach. "Dinner's ready," she said, voice clipped, nodding toward the dining room. Inside, the scene was unchanged. Dad sat at the head of the table, flipping through a car magazine with disinterest. Landon sprawled across 2 chairs, phone in hand, smirking as he bragged about sales, commissions, and plans to upgrade his truck. Mom's eyes lit up with pride every time she touched his shoulder or praised a number he achieved. And me? I took the empty seat by the window, the one no one contested anymore, invisible in plain sight. Then came the question I knew would cut deep. Mom paused, fork in hand, eyes narrowing. "And you? What have you done lately that earns you a spot at this table?" The room fell silent. Landon smirked. Dad lifted an eyebrow but said nothing. I could feel the weight of every glance, every judgment, every unspoken comparison stacked on my shoulders. Mom's voice sharpened, cutting through the quiet. "Well, you haven't earned your place here." Laughter erupted, cruel and sharp. Landon snorted first, the sound echoing like a trophy shot across the table. Dad tried to hide a twitching laugh behind his glass, failing. Even cousins at the kids' table giggled, pointing at me as if I were a show rather than a person. My cheeks burned with anger, humiliation, and a strange calm at the same time. I leaned back slightly, voice steady, even as my hands gripped the chair. "Good thing my success doesn't need your approval." The scrape of my chair against the floor sounded louder than anything else in the room, a punctuation mark on the sentence of my childhood. I didn't wait for a reply. Keys in hand, I stood, walking toward the door with deliberate calm. "Don't you walk away from this family." Mom's voice cracked across the room, sharp and desperate. I paused briefly, looking back, voice clear over my shoulder. "I'm not walking away from family. I'm walking toward the one I built." Her face twisted, frustration and disbelief fighting for dominance. "You're embarrassing us," she shouted, following me to the porch. The screen door slammed behind me, cutting her off from my world. I slid into the driver's seat, the engine humming like a promise. As I backed out of the driveway, I caught a last glimpse of Landon's smug grin and Mom's hands on her hips. Dad remained inside, eyes on the fading interior. The road out of Boise stretched ahead, dark and open, a canvas untouched by expectation. For the first time in years, it felt like I was moving in the right direction. Not running, not hiding, but choosing. The cold Idaho air whipped through the open windows, clearing away the dust of 9 years. The radio crackled, an old country station that Mom hated, and I let the melodies fill the car, letting the sound drown out the laughter and judgment that had followed me through childhood. Every mile became a small liberation. Every memory I left behind was a weight lifted. Easter was over, but the night was young, and my life, built quietly, patiently, without anyone noticing, stretched out ahead of me. I didn't cry, I didn't look back, I didn't call anyone. I drove, letting the distance confirm my choice. Success, peace, and self-respect were mine, regardless of whether anyone at that table could understand it. For the first time, the silence wasn't empty. It was louder than any argument, more meaningful than any approval I had been denied. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, black asphalt glinting under the pale moonlight. Behind me, Boise, and everything tied to it, shrunk smaller with every mile. The porch light, Landon's smirk, my mother's sharp words, all of it became a memory, distant and unreal, like a story I had once read and now had the power to rewrite. The cold Idaho air whipped through the car, carrying away 9 years of dust, 9 years of invisible burdens, 9 years of trying to earn validation that would never come. I turned up the radio, the old country station spilling into the car, twangy vocals and slow drums filling the silence. Mom hated this station. It was sentimental, nostalgic, maybe even silly. But to me, it was freedom. Each note felt like a reminder that life could exist outside the rigid expectations of my family, outside the walls of judgment and comparison that had boxed me in for so long. The gas station on the edge of town offered a brief pause. I filled the tank and grabbed a coffee, the clerk giving me a knowing nod, like he understood someone who wasn't arriving, but leaving. I smiled faintly, tipping my cap, but didn't speak. Words weren't necessary. The road ahead would speak louder than any conversation. Easter had passed, but its lessons lingered. I reflected on the boy I had been, quietly learning code in the dark, capturing fleeting light with borrowed cameras, fixing broken computers for neighbors while my mother celebrated touchdowns. I remembered the sting of comparison, the ache of invisibility, the feeling of being small in a house where praise was rationed and reserved for someone else. But those days were behind me now. They had shaped me, strengthened me, and propelled me toward the life I was building, on my own terms. Pittsburgh had taught me silence could be louder than any argument. Denver had shown me that distance wasn't running, it was choosing. Choosing where to invest your time, your energy, and your love. Choosing the people and places that valued you not for appearances, not for trophies, but for who you truly were. I sipped my coffee and glanced at the dashboard clock. Past midnight. The world felt vast and quiet, full of potential. No one could measure my worth, no one could define my achievements, and no one could dictate the pace of my life. Every decision, every late night spent honing a skill, every moment of quiet perseverance had led me here. And here, I was free. Freedom didn't feel like rebellion. It felt like the first deep breath after being underwater for years. It felt like the hum of the engine beneath me, the chill of night air on my skin, the road stretching infinite ahead. Every mile was a promise, every turn a testament to the choices I had made, and every passing sign a reminder that the world beyond Boise was mine to explore. I thought of family dinners, of mashed potatoes and ham, of Landon's cheers and Mom's laughter, and then I let the memory fade. I wasn't angry, not really. I was grateful, for the lessons, for the clarity, for the fire that had driven me forward. Those years of invisibility had forged my independence. Those dismissals had built my confidence. And now, I carried a life that was entirely mine, earned, chosen, and lived on my own terms. The night passed, the highway unfolding beneath me. City lights glimmered in the distance, promising opportunities, challenges, and experiences waiting to be claimed. I didn't look back. The road behind me was for reflection. The road ahead was for action. In that quiet, endless stretch of asphalt and moonlight, I realized the truth I had learned over the years. Life's value isn't determined by approval, applause, or recognition from others. It's measured by the courage to follow your own path, the persistence to build something meaningful, and the wisdom to know when to leave behind what no longer serves you. And I was ready. The future was unwritten, but it was mine, and I was moving toward it with every mile, every heartbeat, and every breath of cold Idaho air that cleared the past. I had forged my path, and for the first time in my life, I could travel it without apology, without regret, and without anyone else's validation.